welcome back to the Sexy Business Podcast. This time you've stumbled in on a meeting that we are having. It's time to talk about business, it's time to talk about numbers, and it's time to talk about the recently released Steam game Benefits Ship. Why we are talking about this and why it is a bit interesting is that the developers posted a whole bunch of their data onto Twitter in kind of an AMA. And I want to go through it and talk about what this actually means for them as creators. But in case you hadn't forgotten, I'm CEO Spooky, and with me is my co-director, Lewd Neko.
That's Mrs. Lewd Neko.
Mrs. Lewd Neko, my boss. And this is the Sexy Business Podcast, where we talk about all kinds of stuff with game development in the NSFW industry, stuff like VTubing, stuff like cam work, all that kind of stuff that comes together to be working in the NSFW industry. And I think that this is an interesting, case study for us to kind of talk about. If you'll direct your attention to the screen, I will show you the first slide. This is Benefits Ship's cost breakdown. So firstly, they outlined how much money they spent on the development, which is about 11,000 USD in just illustrations, for example. And additionally, the total development time, which is 17 months. And this is going to be really important because I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, but 17 months of work on the game. If you are working full time, 40 hours a week, that is 2,720 hours, which is a lot. And again, we'll come back to that later. But they also listed their copies needed to break even, but I don't think that number is correct. But I'll come back to all this. So this is what they posted, their cost breakdown, being super transparent with what happened. And this game actually did really well in its Steam release. I believe it's been out for exactly 1 month, and that's why they're talking about the data now, because they have the first Steam payout month reporting to look at. So if you will have a look at our second slide that I've prepared, this is their payout breakdown. So they're selling the game for $2.99 USD, which is incredibly cheap.
Seriously.
For what it is. And because the way that the storefront cut, the artist cut, all this kind of stuff, you'd lose a lot in a percentage from a very small number. And so they basically do the breakdown where per unit sold, what they would take away as the creator is 70 cents US, which is incredibly little. But this is another key number that we're going to be using for maths in a second. Because I wanted to break this down to really show what's happening here. Because you go, oh, cool, look, you made so much money. Wow, this is great. But they worked for 17 months unpaid. So if you could imagine working for almost 3,000 hours and receiving nothing for it, this is the job for you, I guess. So
are you a masochist?
I know, right? Here's the quick recap, right? I put a bunch of numbers together and I created this slide so we can go through and kind of talk about what the creative industry does look like. Because if you are making roughly 70 cents per individual sale, and in their reporting, they had sold almost 20,000 copies. That works out to be about $13,000 individual profit, which is $200 less than all of the money that they invested. With 17 months of working, with not being paid at all. So that works out to be an hourly rate of $4.90. So you could be working most minimum wage jobs in my country, Australia, at double, triple, quadruple this number quite easily. I'm pretty confident actually just being on Centrelink is more money than that at an hourly rate. And so yeah, the development costs were $13,700, and so that means that in their first month they did break even, right? Which is really good. But it also means that it's technically 18 months of work to actually make any money, which is also not great. I really wanted to point that out because in my industry and stuff that I've worked on before, people are like, here's this cool project I've been working on. It's taken me 7 years to get to this point. tinkering on the side, working on this here and there, and it's finally ready. And it's still going to take me a year to go through all the publishing and development, final stuff, right? And you're like, that's great. This is clearly not a good business model, and is not going to work out like that. So this kind of stuff is really tough. But one of the other cool things that this team did was they basically listed all of the things that people were complaining about their game. And THM gets basically all of the exact same complaints, and we make way less money than they do. So we have way less money to invest back into the game to be able to keep it going. And we sell our game for a higher amount, like a much more realistic number. So for me, it was like, cool, maybe people are just shit and will always complain about problems, or just expect way more out of stuff, considering it's very often a one-person team doing 90% of the stuff. But
I also want to say, I think these criticisms are interesting when you pair it with their Steam page.
Yeah.
Because that's always something I take into consideration, especially with visual novel reviews, is that they're always like, sometimes it's just people who hate visual novels, and they're like, why do I have to read in this visual novel? And it's like, you bought a visual novel. I don't know what you were expecting. So like, I want to specifically look at the very short and the no choices. No choices is a really common complaint, even though there's really great visual novels that don't have choices. Higurashi is like one of the most famous horror visual novels of all time. It is linear. It has no choices. Choices are not what makes a visual novel good. But like, right directly, the very first line in the about part of their game page is enjoy a short and linear erotic visual novel. Like, it says it right there. This is going to be short and it's going to be linear, so no choices.
Yeah, so that's another interesting thing, right? That means that the actual game development part of the game doesn't exist. This is all writing and narrative development, and like more like directorial stuff where they're planning out scenes and backgrounds and characters and stuff. So again, the game is really bare bones, and that's fine, because some of my best NSFW game experiences have been stuff like that. Like all of the FTW side games are exactly like that, and they're really short. They may be 20 minutes maximum, but you're like, honestly, how long do I need to be jerking my shit for? If it's 20 strong minutes and then I absolutely blast everywhere, then surely that's worthwhile. How much more do I really need out of a product,
Also, I'm going to be honest, like, I think there are plenty of visual novels that suffer from being too wordy, where it's just like, I don't need a 10,000, word description of this one room.
But that's one of my big
actively
complaints,
makes it worse.
right? Where you're like, cool, dialogue, and then it's just nothing has changed in the scene at all, and they're either just talking or it's just descriptions and filler and stuff like that, and you just end up skipping to the next thing to change, and then you end up just skipping all of the dialogue through it because it's just so much filler. And that's why I don't specifically do that for a lot of the games that we make. Sleep Shock has the most like dialogue and non-CG content between things, but of the other two games, it's basically only scenes back to back, and so that makes them much shorter. But it means that it's all content. There's like zero filler in it. And I haven't actually played Benefit Ship, so I can't specifically cry to that. And maybe we will come back and talk about it on the channel, specifically the merits of the game. But the development stuff I think is very interesting. But yeah, let me run through the criticisms list, because it's very short. Would have liked 30 to 60 minutes more, and I feel like that applies to every single fucking game. On our Steam page, all of our criticisms are like, you can get from one end of this game to the other in 15 minutes. Time of game played 45 minutes. It's like, fucking kill yourself. And then average gameplay time at the moment for all of our games is above an hour and a half. So I genuinely think a lot of this is just like, oh, I came in 3 seconds. The game's not long enough. It's like so unfounded and irritates me so much. I don't know if that's obvious or not. The second one is no animation. That's a thing that we also do as well. Animation is really tough. You either like do a really shit job by getting an external person to animate it with like a squish and pull type stuff, or you actually get yeah, or you get an artist to come and actually do frames, and all of these things are kind of awkward. I done something similar to that in the Black Contract Chapter 1, where I had two loose assets of boots and I animated them by frame in Photoshop. I think it's 16 frames in total, where it just slowly walks across the screen and it takes like 3 seconds. And that took me all day. So I genuinely understand why a lot of games is going to focus on a like I would rather 3 full-page CGs than one CG that is a 4 frame loop or whatever. Like I would just rather more interesting, different, impactful scenes.
Also, that illustration price is just going to
It's
skyrocket if you're
insane.
like,
I
oh,
know.
we want all the sprites to be animated. We want to have animated sex scenes with all these variations. Like, all that just costs more money.
Yeah, you want me to spend more money on development, and you will not spend more money on the game. That's definitely a thing I can do now. Point three
And
is sorry.
I was just gonna say, and it also, when it comes to like hiring the actual artists, like not every artist is gonna know how to do all that stuff,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the ones that do are going to charge more. So even your regular illustrations now cost more money.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why Benefitship did so well is because the artist, Sulkete, is really big. Has like 130K followers on Twitter at time of recording. And I believe that like this is entirely an effort to monetize that specific audience from the art that they make. Which is pretty much exactly what I did with CubeSaver when we released Shackles. What 2 years ago it was now. And I imagine that their audience is specifically going to expect exactly Socrates' work. But if other random people are coming along and seeing it, they're like, well, why isn't this artist doing things that they're not known for? It's a bit silly. But point three, story could have been paced better, particularly the time skips and the conclusion felt abrupt. This is obviously something I can't talk to because both the storytelling in my games is dog shit, and also I haven't played Benefits shit. But I get it. Like it can be hard to work in that medium because in a book, it's incredibly limited exactly how fast and long someone's reading a thing. But when you're switching between images and different scenes and stuff like that, and what's visually changing on the screen is matching the pacing of talking and dialogue and narration and stuff like that is very different. And as I understand it, this is their first game. So I would happily take a pass on that. That's fine. And 4 is lack of CG variation. Some SFW moments could have used a CG. This is another one that I think about a lot, where it's like, I have to pay an artist to render out a scene doing something. What kind of impactful moment is this? Is it worth me illustrating the character going from the fridge and getting something? Or instead, am I adding a sex scene? Like, am I adding a more impactful scene? We've done some of this with Shackles because it was like I wanted to have a really important conversation between these two characters. I'm talking specifically about the scene on the pier with the Queen and the MC right after they've been magically transformed. And it's like, this is important because the Queen is acknowledging the change in the main character and that, like, they've gone, okay, yes, I've gone through this journey and I've changed. What is my, new place in this world like? And then, like, immediately afterwards, there's, like, a non-nude cuddling scene. And I'm like, these are impactful moments for the development of the MC. It doesn't necessarily need to be high-impact sex to tell these things. But it's still going to resonate with the players as they're going through because they kind of understand what's happening. And it's like, that's a director thing, right? Like, I have to pick what I'm showing and what I'm telling. Like, what's happening in dialogue and what's getting illustrated. But it's also a business management thing. It's like, how many things can I illustrate? And these days, it's always like, okay, I need to just make as much stuff, scenes as possible. In Sleeve Shock, nearly every illustration added is a scene. In Shackles of Elsman, we have a lot more stuff that's like, here is a thing that's happening to a character and must be shown. Like the main character being transformed must be shown, right? We've got spoilers for some upcoming content. We are doing some giantess content.
Yay!
So the main character gets shrunk down, and obviously we need to draw specific stuff for that because you need to, change perspectives.
I'm so excited.
You need to redraw some stuff. So that's, again, spoiler, you heard it here first. Something that I've been looking forward to doing a little while is goofing around with some other different niches and stuff that we haven't really touched on. But in like side arcs of characters, so it's not like their main core things. It's just like a thing that happens and they have to kind of deal with it. Which I'm excited about, but like that's the same kind of thing. It's like, okay, am I going to spend all this time showing a sex scene, or am I going to make the MC's shrinking down and transformation be more realistic and more viable and that kind of stuff?
I
And
would have
then
to say for a game like this, I would expect the focus from the CGs to be on NSFW because it's like it's
absolutely,
described as it's friends with benefits, it's Fuda, it's erotic visual novel. If you want more of the like cute moments, I feel like that's where you find the dating sims that have adult content because
yeah,
then you'll get some of those more like cutesy moments before the sexy stuff. But it's just kind of one of those things where like manage your expectations. This is a $3 game. It's a shorter visual novel. You probably want it to focus on the adult content. I imagine there'd be significantly more complaints if they, decided to take some of that budget for the sex scenes and put it towards like them, having a very chaste kiss or something like that.
yeah. Yeah, that's it. Like, imagine if you, let's say for sake of argument, and these numbers are going to be really small, but let's say you get 8 images that are full page things of, maximum impact and excitement or whatever. Of those 8, you are going to want to use all 8 in scenes throughout the game, and you probably want to skew it so that most of them happen at the end. So it's going to be like 3 in the first half, 5 in the second half, or something like that, right? And then you go, okay, if I only have 8, how many of them are going to be not sex scenes? Like, probably 0. If I have 20, if I have 50, okay, if I have 50, then maybe I'm going to have 5 or 6 where I can be like a setup right before a big scene happens. And you have a bit more freedom to put things in there. But like the background design for this game looks really good, and the character design and stuff like that looks really good. So it's not like they're cutting by having shitty stock backgrounds and filling other stuff in there. Like, it doesn't feel like a cash grab in that way. I feel like maybe just it just feels like the same complaint of we wish there was more, right? And to me, if somebody goes, "Oh, this is really great. I wish there was more," means that they
DLC.
enjoyed it, and I should keep making it because they're gonna want to see more content. Like it feels less like a criticism and much more like I liked the thing, and rather than praising it, this is I'm only allowed to say negative things. And because like complaint number 5, no choices slash gameplay is the same thing, right? That's just the medium you're in. You're playing visual novel. If they're expecting more like a dating sim, they wouldn't have clicked onto a game that has 2 characters, one of which is you. Um, and with the story
And
that they're
again,
going with,
I
it's
would
really
just argue
basic.
that like choices don't make a visual novel better. I think there's been plenty of visual novels where I find they use choices incredibly ineffectively to the
Yeah,
point where I'm like, this game would be better if actually you didn't try to force yourself to divert the plot lines here. Or like, a really good example for me is there's this visual novel called Shining Song Starnova, and it has branching plot lines, but they're literally based around like one choice. It's like one choice that determines whether the girl you're trying to date like goes completely insane and something terrible happens to her, or you guys end up together and everything's fine. And it's like so arbitrary that I would just like the bad ends don't even feel earned or like necessary.
yeah. I also have that FOMO of if I'm picking this option, and it diverges me down a path, what's the thing I've missed? Because you don't know what that choice is, right? And this is one of the things that we did with Shackles very specifically, where it plays more like a dating sim. But every single time you make a choice, it tells you which character that choice is married to. So if I pick something that's going to send me down the witch's arc, it's got a red arrow on it, basically. And you're like, okay, well, if I've already played through and done the witch content, I'll click all the other bubbles, or I'll pick a different color to run through and play. Whereas with other stuff, and like my pig princess is kind of the same, right? You either have
Mm.
completely irrelevant dialogue choices, or because it's like they just both go the same thing and you get different things said, or it's like I'm missing a whole section of something because I didn't explore what that thing was. And you're like, cool, that means there's more gameplay for later playthroughs. But I don't think people are coming to visual novels and doing multiple playthroughs. I think people are coming to visual novels, getting to the end and going, this game sucked. It wasn't long enough. Because it's a wide medium, not a long medium, and they don't actually spend time exploring. So maybe that's why Cufflinks and Cages, our most recent game, is an interesting formula because it doesn't have a beginning and an end, it's a loop, right? And you just basically play through the same day loop. I don't mean like literally like a time loop. I mean like your schedule is the same. You show up at
Mm-hmm.
work, you do a task, something happens to you, you go back, you do a task, something happens to you, you go home, repeat. And in that way, the scenes interact with you, the player, like they come and get you, rather than you exploring and needing to know where everything is and kind of find it. And for some people, this formula is a bit weird and different because they're a bit lost. Now, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm I'm doing invoices. When am I going to get to fuck somebody? Which I can understand is a bit confusing. But like you can see the game is slowly reaching its completion and stuff is happening to you, and then the story is naturally progressing. But it's not like, oh, I clicked on the arc that's the least developed and the game ended, and now I assume that means that is the entire size of the game. Which is why I think people complain a lot that our games are short, but it's too hard to tell.
Yeah, and that's somewhere where like I wonder if like adding in like actual physical branch maps into a visual novel would like help people to be able to see like, oh, here's the choice where I fucked up. Or like, oh,
Mm,
here's all the other routes. Because like some people know, like I always know, like I always look at the CG gallery, and that's how I can just sort of deduce, like, oh, I missed a scene really early on, or something like that, or I missed one
mm,
really late in the game. But not everybody knows that, or not everybody cares enough to do that sort of math. But I know some visual novels that have had like actual branches that you can see, or it'll have some sort of a achievement list, or like a list of like, okay,
yeah.
you got this ending, you got this path, you got this path. That way you actually have a motivation to like kind of go over that list and be like, oh, what did I miss, and do I want to go back? Because usually the name of the achievement or the description for it will be like, oh, okay, there was a route for this character, or there was another ending for this one.
Yeah, having aids like that for the players so that they can help understand what they're doing, what kind of direction they're supposed to be going in, I think is good. In Shackles, we basically just have a gallery that has most of the scenes, if not all of them, in it. When you look at the gallery, you're like, oh, everything's complete. Cool. I must be done here. In Sleeve Shock, we don't have anything like that, but also the game's way more linear. Basically, every single time you fork away, it comes back to the main continuity, and you're just choosing a person to spend more time with than another person. So if you come back and play it, then you're like, okay, I'll just choose the other person, and it's fine. Like, it's really not that wide. And for this one, we're aiming to make it go long rather than be wide, because that's literally what I feel like the complaint is for Shackles. And then Cufflinks and Cages is the complete opposite, because when scenes come and get you and you play through them, each scene is split up into multiple parts and can have different endings based on how long it's been since you last come and a few other factors. But it's like, so if you're insanely, desperately horny, the scene is going to play out differently than if you weren't. And so each different scene has a different marker for you to unlock to say that you've completed it and seen everything. And then basically the gallery is just a list of markers that you've completed so that you know that you've seen all the content or not. And I'm a lot more good about making sure that that is updated and correct every time you add new scenes. But it's hard to be playing through and like going back and looking and go, oh, I missed something. What's here? How do I find this or whatever? It's more just like a vague understanding of your percentage of completeness, really. But yeah, having tools like that will help people understand what routes they're supposed to be going on, what stuff they haven't done yet. It's like, oh, maybe there's a bunch of this particular character that I didn't spend enough time exploring. I should go and check that out. And realistically, this is just me informing you, the viewer, to be like, look, go and explore more, go and try out more things, go and see what other content and stuff is there. Go and try and fully complete the CG gallery. Like for example, with my playthrough of FTW, I've done two main character arcs. I did Claudia and Mallory, I believe. I haven't gone and done any other characters. So there's plenty of the CG gallery that's just empty. And it's like, okay, who am I going to pick? Who am I going to go through and do now or whatever? When a new update comes out, it's like, cool, what's the new content that I need to go and look at? Has the character's arc changed or has stuff been added that I need to go and look at? And it's kind of the same.
I will say though, like, I'm actually kind of surprised that this game is just $3, mostly because of the fact that it's fully voice acted. which is like I think I mentioned this before. It's super uncommon for an English visual novel to be fully voice acted.
Mm,
A lot of them have partial voice acting, where they might have like voice lines during the sex scenes, or just during key moments. But voice acting costs and management and all of that, just like the sort of direction that you have to do and getting all of it into the game, like takes a lot of work. And it's something you don't see as much in like the Western sphere. So that would
mm,
be immediately a selling point for me. I would have been probably willing to pay like anywhere from like probably $5 to $7 for this one, just because it has full voice acting. So I just wanted to sort of like mention that because like $3, like that's not even the cost of like a coffee in the morning. Most
yeah.
places it's like $3 to $5 for a single cup of coffee, and you're getting a basically like a full short story with art and voice acting in it is how I look at it. Because a traditional novel, like if you go to a bookstore, that's going to be 100,000 words typically, and usually it's going to range from like $15 to $20 if it's a brand new novel. And then here it's like you're paying a fraction of that cost, and yes, it's shorter, but you also have art, you have music, you
More
have
impactful. Yeah.
yeah, you have all this other stuff going on, which more than sort of justifies the costs when I kind of look at games like this.
Yeah. Because I do have some thoughts about that choice of price point. I put back up on screen the original cost breakdown, and the voice acting is 2.5 thousand USD, which means they have to sell 1,000 copies basically to just pay for that one thing. And they managed to sell almost 20,000 copies in the first month. So my thought is the lower price point meant that more people were willing to come on and buy the game, and so they were able to get more sales than they probably would have if it was a larger price.
Hmm.
But downside is you can never go on sale. You just can never lower the price than $3. So you'll never get big boosts in the future from Steam sales. You'll never get, those kind of. I think it's like every 3 months, big incentives where like a big event's happening. You'll get so much more spotlight, and people will come and check out your thing if you reduce the price. All of THM's games regularly go on sale for 50% off in like pretty much every sale that comes up. I just opt into everything. And that is where most of our traffic happens because people complain that we're a bit expensive, but all of a sudden when it's 50% off, you're like, oh man, look, it's fucking time. Let's go and buy it. And so I worry that means that the longevity of the game is eventually, because they've hit such a big audience initially for a low price point, that they have nowhere to go from there. Like they've already hit the customer maxima. Whereas if it was a higher price point and people are waiting, they're sitting on the wish list, the sale comes out and they have a chance to convert to sale later, means that you have a higher ceiling on what actual profits you could be making from selling the game instead of what this is. Because I don't know if they're intending on doing more development, if they're adding more content or whatever later, or if the plan is to go, okay, look, this is the first game. We pray that it breaks even. We will now go and make additional games using the same formula. And if we add more content or if we find ways to make it feel like it has more value, we'll raise the price then, which I think is most likely possible. Just guessing by looking at what they're doing. Because if they go and add content to this game, how do they get more money out of the purchaser, right? So that's kind of what we wanted to cover for this episode. I know it does feel a bit like we've rambled about one specific tweet for half an hour, but I think stuff like this is important. And a big shout out to the team that has made Benefits Ship. I think their Twitter handle just literally is Benefits Ship. And also Solkate is the artist. Both of them have come together to make an interesting game for us to talk about. Regardless of whether the game is
Yeah.
good or bad, how transparent they are, and all of this data and stuff is actually really helpful for people in the industry to get an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, because normally you don't really get numbers like this. Like at best, you might have like a Patreon you can make a guesstimate of, but you can't ever tell how money's actually being divided. Or, even with Kickstarters, usually it's sort of vague percentages, so you never know like the exact numbers or like
Mm.
how much they profit, things like that.
Yeah, well, you also don't very publicly see stuff like the platform fees and like all this kind of stuff that they lose way before any of this money becomes a profit. And stuff like refunds and all this kind of stuff that comes into it that eats your bottom line before you even actually ever get to pay yourself. But yeah, I saw this and I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. First of all, they're doing something very similar to me. Second of all, they're having a lot of the same complaints that we are for the same kind of product. And that was super validating for me. Um, But I did want to come and talk about this kind of stuff because even if you haven't seen this thread, it is worth going and having a look at. Because being super public about this information helps other developers get an idea for what's happening. It's unlikely that you, a first-time game creator, viewer, will be able to come and do the same thing because Sorkata had such a big following that it was much easier to monetize on that audience. And because this game is specifically a product to monetize on an audience rather than relying on something like Patreon as a subscription model to try and retain people over time, having a single product that people can come and buy is much easier. And in the same way that like streamers and stuff will do merch for people to purchase. It's all
Oh,
about.
they've actually already announced their next game.
See, there you go. I knew it.
It's called Born to Breed. It's another Futanari visual novel with monster girls of all kinds, and it will feature live 2D animation.
Interesting. So there you go. They've found something to add value to the product, and they're going to be making a sequel, which I assume is going to have a higher price point. So I'm giving myself points for that, and I will be following along with that project as well because that sounds interesting too. It's kind of my niche. But yeah, this has got some of the kind of stuff that we'd like to come and talk in about the Sexy Business Podcast. It isn't always waifu tier list. Sometimes it's actually useful, helpful information. And if you want more of this kind of stuff, please, sing out in the comments. Let us know. Is there games that you're interested in us taking a look at? Is there waifus you think that we need to know about? Is there content like this that you're interested in learning more about when it actually comes to running something in the sexy business? Because all that stuff is important to us and why we are here in the office working 9 to 5, all dressed up in the suit. You can see Neko put on a special outfit for us and everything. And so, if you want Happy Neko to come back in the tie and the suit and for us to give her the head pats, you have to click the like and the subscribe button and stick around and come and see us every episode, hear what we've got going on, because otherwise we will have this sad cat, and we don't want the sad cat.
We didn't make enough profits.
We didn't make enough profits. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to sack my highest earning employees. Neko, it's time to go.
No.
And for us as well, it's time to go. And we'll see you next week on the Sexy Business Podcast.
Bye-bye.